Okay, boys and girls, Chris Dimakos, who joins us every Wednesday afternoon today, no exception. He is on the line. And Chris, you bring up something because we're now, of course, getting kids back to school. But beyond kids back to school, and we talked about this, I think, just about a week or so ago, it's more and more parents going back to the office. So this idea of, remote working or mobile working, whatever, you're seeing more and more companies now require that their workers go back. And you bring up an interesting point, which is, let's say that's you, right? This concerns you even as a mom, right? You're now going to have to go back to to your office because your employer is demanding it. The question is, can you ask for reform in the workplace when it comes to something like sick days, because you now have to go back to the office to help deal with a situation perhaps at home where you have, a sick child? Because let's face it, we're not done with, flus and colds and everything else. And when everyone goes back to the office and everyone's back to school, that situation will crop up again. So how much room do you have here to maneuver or even ask for something like that?
It's a great question. And I can tell you this, before COVID, there would be very little to no room to be able to ask for a change in your work conditions based on sick days and parental responsibilities. But since COVID, that changed. It changed in a number of ways. One is that what we noticed with COVID, when we're trying to reduce the spread of these viruses, obviously being able to work from home would eliminate a sick day. Otherwise, if you're not feeling 100%, but you're still out of bed, you can't go to work for fear of spreading the illness. But if you stay home, you can still log on and do some work. So what we noticed was there were more workers, part of the worker pool, that remain engaged and at work, even though they had symptoms, and that would prevent the spread. But now what we're seeing is many companies, they weren't prepared for that transition to remote. They're calling many employees back to the office. This September we're going to have the highest number of workers return to work, and this coupled with the return to the kids going to school. We've seen many reports come out of the U.S. and here in Canada, and Alberta, one to be particular, that are saying we're going to have probably one of the worst seasons in terms of the spread of these illnesses because there's so many people going back to work. So that being said, to answer your question, now it's a little bit different. The circumstances have changed, and we've noticed now that the workers that are the most penalized by this, return to work are usually females that have kids, because when their kids home from school,
right,
they have to stay home from work, and that penalizes them by not being paid because they're absent from work. So many are starting to say, hey, maybe the law and maybe the work environment should start considering the fact that we don't want to spread illnesses. Maybe we should make exceptions for remote work when it calls for it. So it's a fluid type of situation. It's changing. COVID changed the game completely. And I would venture to say that we're probably going to see some reform from governments as it pertains to sick days and converting days to remote work so that you don't have to, miss a day of pay and miss salary because your kid's homesick.
So, but let's say you're in a situation where, your terms of employment have already been determined. Now this comes up. Let's assume you were able to work from home part-time. And now you want to actually, if you're going to use the word, you want to negotiate a change. Can you? I mean, is your employer forced to do that with you if you ask for it? How would that work?
You can absolutely negotiate. You can always negotiate. Now, the question is, are the employers obliged to respond either in a positive way to your demand? And the answer to that is the employer obviously can deny your request, but they would be more open to recourse now than they would before. And the reason I'm saying that is because there's a lot of data that's coming out. There's a lot of literature that's coming out about how especially parents in the workforce are having a very difficult time with return to office 5 days a week because they're unable to work and it's costing them a lot of money. So what they're doing sometimes is they're sending their kids sick to school. They're giving them medication, so it kind of masks their symptoms, and they're going to work sick. That's costing the employer even more money. So what I would tell you is, can you? Yes. Is your employer going to be open to it? I would say they should be, and they should be more open to it now than they ever have been before. Question is, if they're not open to it, can you go to court? Can you file a complaint with the Labor Standards Tribunal? I would say right now you probably have a much better chance of success if you're alleging that your employer is not flexible enough with their work policy to accommodate you and your family and the situation that you're dealing with to be able to work from home remotely instead of being in office, you probably have the best chance of success today versus, let's say, 5 years ago. So it's changing. The landscape is changing. And what people have to realize is you start communicating with your employer and say, look, my kid's sick. I don't want to miss work. I can log on from home. There's nothing I can't do from logging on that I can't do from the office. Are you open to having that situation that's available to me? And if your employer is not, well, then you have to think about what it's going to cost you, whether that's the right place for you to work, and whether or not you want to escalate it. But again, I'm not telling you that you have to go to court every time your employer says no to you. What I am saying, though, is if it's a serious situation that's costing you a lot of money, maybe even your job, where your employer says, you're not here enough, we're going to have to let you go. Now more than ever, the courts and the law is very, very sensitive to the fact that, being forced to go back to work 5 days a week after what we've learned about these illnesses, you got the flu, you got RSV, you got COVID, all that stuff is a nice little cocktail for everyone this time around. It's going to be very difficult to navigate for everybody.
So the other thing I bring up is the fact that, and we've talked about this as well, had a woman who consults just a couple of weeks ago talking about this. What if you just opt in and say, you know what, I refuse to go back to office full time overall? In other words, you're mandated to go back, but you know what? No, that's not how it's going to be. I mean, how much weight does that carry if you're going to challenge your employer?
It's been done. There have been successful employees that were able to maintain a remote work, at least part of it, in their relationship. What the courts look for is what were the terms of your employment before, and what were your terms during COVID and afterwards. And if your employment contract wasn't very specific in terms of where you had to work and what you had to do in terms of being present or not, then you had a really strong chance of having your work conditions modified. However, if the employer was very clear that this is a in-house, we have to be here in the office, exceptionally, we're going to accommodate what the government's saying about COVID, but once that's done, you're coming back to the office. If that was clear and set from the employer from the get-go, you have less of a chance of succeeding if you want to challenge that.
Okay. The only other thing I guess I would ask is, in a situation like that, maybe it's the same as it would have been anyway. You have a sick kid at home. You're the primary caregiver. When you were still going to the office 5 days a week, if that was the case, you just took a sick day. Why would that change now?
Well, it wouldn't. The question is, what if it's not one or two sick days? What if, and what we're seeing now, it's way more than that. What if it's 15 sick days? What if it's 20 sick days? What if your kid is sick? I got 4 myself, and I can tell you, I don't remember during school, we're always at the pharmacies getting, medicine, antibiotics. It's just a common thing. So what if you're missing not 1 or 2, but 15, 20 days? That adds up, not only financially, but it starts to wear on your relationship with your employer. If you're supposed to be at work and you're calling in sick, the solution is you have to address it with your employer and say, this is the reality of where I'm at. Here's what's going to happen. Can we work something out where when my kid is sick, I can work either part-time from remote, 1 or 2 days, just to get him over the hump? So basically the message today is it's going to happen. You can't ignore it. It's a heavy strain, especially for the parents that are responsible for the primary care of your kids. I would recommend having a discussion with your employer in anticipation of what you're going to be seeing in November, December, and January. It's going to be rough, and you're better off tackling that and being open with your employer now instead of dealing with it after you've called them sick for 15 or 20 days.
Okay. I forgot the one thing I was going to bring up just as a last pointer, but I forgot what I was going to, but it had to do with this. And I'm just wondering, when you get called, but everybody goes back to work, right? Right. And you decide, I remember. So the idea is, if the idea between staying home and going to the office, it's all about productivity, right? If you have rules or, objectives you have to meet in your job and they're being met at home, your argument is, well, I don't have to be at the office. You told me you needed to get this done and I got all this done. Is that an argument?
That's not only an argument, that is the most important. That's the primordial argument that people use. So if the employer cannot justify why you have to be present in the office, if they can't show, well, there's a lack of communication, the team works together, they're not here during meetings, if there's no distinction to be made in terms of performance, that is heavily in favor of the employee who's saying, hey, can I continue, or at least part of my time remote instead of being full time in the office? But what you just summed up, that's the main argument an employee would have to say, there is no difference in my performance. Everything's getting done in terms of my job and my contract and my conditions that I have to satisfy. So that's what they would use to support their argument if it ever got to that point.
Chris, appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Aaron.
Chris Dimakos, our CJAD legal advisor.